Okay, let's go ahead and call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission special meeting for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. If we could call for roll.
Ms. Austin is absent. Mr. Montiel?
Here.
Stephen Ruddles Lopez?
Here.
Stephen, we can barely hear you.
Oh. Here? Can you hear me?
Okay. Mr. Adams?
Here.
Ms. Hubka?
Here.
Mr. Martinez?
Here.
Mr. Renson?
Here.
Mr. Kaplan?
Here.
And Chair Haggerty.
Here.
Quorum is present.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is the approval of the meeting minutes. Any changes, edits, discussions? All right, hearing none, call for a motion to approve.
So moved. I second.
And if we can have a vote.
Mr. Montiel?
Aye.
Mr. Ruddle?
Aye.
Mr. Adams?
Abstain.
Brenda?
Abstain.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mr. Renson?
Yes.
Mr. Kaplan?
Aye.
And Chair Haggerty.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, next agenda item is the approval of findings of facts. First, we'll get a motion to approve, and then we can have any discussion if needed.
Move to approve the findings of fact.
In a second, thank you.
Second.
Any changes, any discussion needed on those findings of fact? Nancy did a fine job of getting them all down. Thank you, Nancy, for doing that.
Okay. Mr. Montiel?
Yes.
Mr. Ruddle?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Abstain.
Ms. Hubka?
Abstain.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mr. Renson?
Yes.
Mr. Kaplan?
Aye.
And Chair Haggerty.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have the public forum. We do not have a public forum. All right. Thank you. So our next agenda item is study session for case 2024 03 comprehensive plan update. And Mr. Froberl, if you would like to present. Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. This is our maybe our third meeting. It's hard to keep track anymore. It's our second open house meeting. So tonight we are moving into the neighborhood assessments, but we're going to start calling them area assessments because we don't want to try to confuse these areas with the new neighborhood boundaries. Those are going to be neighborhoods from going forward. These are just going to be areas. It's going to be very generic. I just wanted to let you know that I heard something at the open house that I wanted to make sure I clarified. Is that so we have been kind of preaching to you that this is an update and certain things won't be changing, and I think there was some confusion about that. So the goals and objectives underneath those plan themes, such as live, work, shop, play, those are staying the same. Those are very aspirational and they're very timeless and they still apply. So we just didn't want to spend time with that. But as you might have, if you were able to go to the open house and look through the maps and the policies, those policies, some of them probably seemed kind of outdated. Some of them seemed like, oh, well, they probably already did that. Maybe that needs to be tweaked or maybe removed. And then, of course, I think there's opportunities for new policies. In fact, I'm sure by the end of this process, we will have other policies that we add to this that aren't here today. But you have to kind of start at the beginning with what you have. So this is what we have in our plan today. These are coming straight from that plan. Same with the catalytic land uses, the areas of stability, all of that is coming straight from the old plan. And that some of that within reason can be tweaked as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that, because we're counting on you to make some recommendations. We're hoping that you will be able to do that for us. And then tonight we're just going to start kind of going through stuff that all of what we have pulled from the old plan. And I have, in that doing so, certain things that struck me. I highlighted them as either green, yellow, or red. Green being, I think that's pretty good, no big deal, keep going. Yellow is kind of questionable, and so I'll raise those with you. And red probably says this probably doesn't make sense anymore. But this is all, you guys need to comment and agree or not with those, my initial reactions. So let's just start at the beginning. 2016 plan includes 13 park-based neighborhood maps. We use Denver as our guide for that. Denver neighborhoods are all named after central parks. And so that's what we did originally. However, times change, and there are some folks in the area had different ideas. And so they wanted to create a more folksy kind of, I think, neighborhood map based on historical subdivision names. And that's what they did. So they resulted in 40 neighborhoods identified and mapped. But I really don't want to make 40 maps. And I really don't want to have 40 sets of policies. So I'm hoping that we can convince people that that's the right way to go. So just as an example, the map on the left is the neighborhood maps that were in the 2016 plan. And then for your reference is the new neighborhood maps based on historical subdivisions. So we want to go from 13 to 6, and our preliminary 6 that we've come up with are northwest, northeast, central being downtown and the wellness district, near south, and then far south and southwest. And I think it's possible that these could be tweaked a little bit depending on what feedback we get. Not radically, I hope, but maybe a block here or there too. So, but we'll see how that goes. And so the first thing to do once I've created the base maps was then to go through all of and apply the right policies from the old neighborhoods to the right map area. So I redistributed those, and then I went through and evaluate each policy, whether they were relevant or there are questions, or maybe they should be removed. So let's get into this. Let's see I don't know if we'll get through this all tonight. That's okay. We could go to the next study session as well, but we'll start off with the kind of like with a clock we'll start off here in the top left-hand corner with the northwest sector of the city. So that's the map, and the neighborhoods that are included with that are Baker Park, South Platte River, and Cushing Park. And so I'm going to start off with BP1, Baker Park 1. So I put this as a yellow, as a question. Preserve and enhance key employment parcels, industrial lease rates, flexible industrial space. And so looking at the employers up there, they tend to be smaller job shops, really. There's not necessarily huge numbers of in any one location or factory or business. The two that we do have that are the largest are Redbird Farms and American Bottling. Home to numerous small business shops, contractors, and suppliers. So my question for a commission is, should we continue to treat the majority of this industrial area as an area of stability?
Is it pretty fully occupied right now? Are there a bunch of vacancies or not?
No, industrial is, and pretty much in the whole Denver metro, industrial has very low vacancy. The square foot per rent is fairly low, but it's at a kind of a premium, and there's really very little vacancy.
So can you maybe clarify, the question is, do we want to keep this BP1, which was preserve and enhance key employment parcels in this area, as a policy for this part of the Northwest, which we're considering Baker Park?
Yes, I want to get your feedback on that.
Okay.
I can't see a good reason to not do that if it's currently stable and well occupied, if it's providing a lot of small businesses and with jobs. Why change it if it's not broken? I have a question more generally about the Northwest. The very Northwest piece seems so detached from the piece that's directly north of Central. I would just suggest renaming it, because I don't think the policies that apply to the true northwest corner of that area are really relevant to the pieces that are east of Santa Fe, but considered also northwest. So it's on the previous page, but
Can you go back to the map real quick? Because it is kind of hard. I
Yeah.
don't see this map in our packet.
No, sorry about that. So I anticipate having to go back and forth with it.
Okay, and thank you. So this would be considered the northwest portion, or is this just the Baker Park portion of the northwest?
This is the whole northwest area. So on the far right, where you see that blue line, that's Broadway. And that blue line symbolizes that it's a multimodal corridor. So it does include the General Ironworks area and Cushing Park area, as well as the areas along the river in Santa Fe. And then it makes its way up to that arm that sticks up into the far northwest. And that's true that they are kind of disjointed. But we kind of wanted to make these as equal of areas as we could. So we thought that looked probably the best. Otherwise, you're just looking at a very small piece of land.
And maybe could you clarify the outline that you're looking at is the dashed line, kind of the outside dashed line, because it's hard to tell with some of it being in gray.
Yeah.
That's all included too in the light gray, I guess I would say, but.
Yes. So it's harder to show this on a computer screen. It's easier to see it on a map. But yes, there is sort of a washed out kind of gray coloring to some of these areas that indicate that that's a stable area, that we don't anticipate changes to those types of land uses in those areas. You can probably see that better, the boundary with the dashed line. Those dashed lines are the new neighborhood boundaries, the 40 boundaries. And you have their names there as well on this map.
Could you give us just a little bit, I think this will affect kind of where we go from here, but transition area, right? These are the areas of focus. These are the areas that are highlighted here. Can you just talk about what that means to, as far as this comp plan is concerned?
Mm-hmm. So I'll start off with the catalytic activity areas. Those are areas that have typically, in mostly high density commercial zoning, where we expect and desire significant change. and we're open to that, and we want to encourage change in those areas. When you get down, the other end of that is the area of stability, which is those grayed out areas. And those are areas are going to be typically very stable commercial areas where we don't see a lot of reason to change, just as David mentioned, as well as very stable single family neighborhoods for the most part, where we also don't think that there should be significant changes. And then you get into what is known as the residential transition area, which are in yellow. So that's kind of a step above the areas of stability where there may be. We think there might be more change there, and in fact we have seen those. They have been historically areas where we have seen change. So on the right side, off of Broadway, to the north of City Center, the General Ironworks area, there's been lots of change there. Lots of scrapes and new townhomes being built. That's been our primary change area in terms of single or two family residential areas. The area to the northwest at the top left hand of the map has also historically been an area of significant change. Just a little bit of history of that area is that that area originally developed as very large lot residential areas that they might have been like 300 feet deep and 75 feet wide. It had a very rural feeling, and it was referred to as Goat Hill. People had a lot of animals and did a lot of small but relatively large gardens. They did a lot of growing their own food. Had a very rural feel, and that changed quite a bit over time. Specifically, there was a school there once called Scenic View School, and it was losing its student population because it's such a small area of the city. And in order, they wanted to save it, and so they made a deal where they upzoned the zoning to R2. And unfortunately, that didn't save their school, but it significantly changed the area. And so, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, primarily before the Great Recession, that was an area that's very hot, and there was a lot of splitting up of these larger lots and building, typically the attached townhomes. There is still a few opportunities in that area. We know that there's the former school building site. The Scenic View School is vacant. There's another site that's far closer to Evans that has a lot of vacant land as well, that's in one holding. And we know that the owners are interested in development. However, they've gone kind of really silent and cold for now. And we kind of wonder about why that is. But it may be that they maybe have other places that they're concentrating on in the metro right now. It could be interest rates. It could be like, we're waiting for the interest rates to come down so that this becomes a more attractive product. Just anecdotal, for lower priced housing has taken somewhat of a small hit during this time of higher interest rates, because it just has put the price of the monthly mortgage payment out of reach for lower income peoples. So that market has really kind of cooled down a bit.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I just have one more question. I know you have a whole presentation to get through. But as far as the shading and areas of catalytic activity and transitional areas, is there a rubric or a set of guiding principles that kind of guide how those are defined?
Yes and no. So yes, during the original plan process for developing these areas, the consultant did some geographic information system analysis of land values. They took the built area value of what was constructed on that land versus the value of the underlying land, and if that ratio was very low, that was considered a prime potential for redevelopment. So that there,
Just a measure of highest and best use and how far away.
yeah, that was a significant input to it. But it's just also a significant part of it is just the art of it. And so zoning, the existing zoning, a lot of this stuff conforms to the existing zoning. So if it's red, it's probably an industrial or a business zone. Orange, the mixed use, tends to be a mixed use zone such as MUR 3B. The yellows are typically R2 zone districts, and those grayed out areas are R1. So yes, there's some knowledge that we applied just from principles of land use planning to it as well.
And so for this particular instance, if you're looking at Baker Park especially, because of the zoning of R2, all of these lots could be changed to multiple units that haven't already been and so that's why the transitional zone is kind of the overlay for this area.
Yes, it's already zoned for that, and there is demand for that. And quite frankly, some of these areas that are yellow are older areas that have some housing issues they're very old, very small, and they may be in very poor condition.
And so again, to go back, the question is preserve and enhance key employment parcels. Is that a policy that we think should be in this area? If there's a question, comment on that, go ahead.
I get where we're going with this. And I think maybe in 2016, they were really worried about keeping jobs and employment alive. And in a tax base that had industry, I think that if we just removed it, we could then key in on today's demand for housing. We have a housing crisis. So does that help us if we remove it, that emphasis on enhancing key employment parcels?
So I guess the reason why I brought this as a yellow is because in this original plan process, one of our consultants identified areas up here, primarily that area that's just south of the Northwest Greenbelt, as that is actually today industrial, but they suggested that maybe in the future that could become a residential expansion area. And so maybe my question should be, how do you guys feel about that?
I mean, I don't mind seeing industrial that's not being well used changed to higher density housing, but I think the Baker Park area, if it's already zoned for R2, the likelihood of making more sense of putting a giant apartment building there by upzoning it further, to me seems odd because it feels like it's too far from the highway and light rail. So R2 seems appropriate for Baker Park, but I don't know if I'd go crazy on giant apartment buildings that are not right on top of major transit centers. Otherwise, you're just creating crazy neighborhood traffic all the time.
Any other thoughts on that? Oh, Carl, go ahead.
Let me step back in the parks map. I'm not sure why you brought that up. The parks map is an entertainment thing. There's no regulations to it. There's no zoning to it. There's just entertainment, basically. So going to this, I can see where you can, because neighborhoods change all the time. In the Northwest, there is a lot of industry up there, and a lot of it could go away, and some of it's profitable for Inglewood, but some of it is not. So around the northwest, what is it, Northwest Park up there? It's a lot of area up there that, it's residential and could be expanded on, but, what are you trying to do with this new mapping thing here? You're not trying to replace the parks map, because that
No,
doesn't do anything.
no, the Northwest Greenbelt was gonna stay there. I guess the question is, do we still feel we want to show that area that's just south of there, where that says L4? Do we still want to consider that as a future housing area, or does that, do we not see that, or don't want to encourage that? We want to keep the industrial uses that are there as areas of stability.
So are these, is the Northwest gonna replace, Region 1 on them? You got Inglewood as, what's it, four zones? Or 6, 7?
There'll be,
I think we're trying to
Six.
go from 13 that
To
were in the
6.
previous study down to 6. The neighborhoods are just kind of underlaid in here to help make that connection to the latest iteration of a breakdown of the city. So realistically, the neighborhoods don't mean anything on here either, other than we're trying to have those breakdowns tied to those neighborhoods as well.
There is a lot of industrial areas that some have been sitting for years. And something needs to be done with that stuff. It's good industrial, it's big areas, huge areas, that if we could get a manufacturer to come in and take over, that'd be great, but, maybe this is, well, show where those areas are and, try to pull somebody in for them. I don't know, so, okay, so I just wanted to make a point of the parks map. There's no, it's an entertainment map, basically. There's,
Yeah.
you're not replacing that with this.
We're trying to go to less maps, though, which I think is a good idea to hopefully concise. Now, the challenge again is there are multiple types of neighborhoods in here. We've got a big industrial chunk right in the middle of kind of two residential neighborhoods. So it's, it's a little bit hard to say overall, it's just one thing. So I think the question again becomes, when we're looking at our screens, this L4 area that is right next to a green belt could be a potential for more residential and a residential buffer in between there. I think David brought up a good point of having high density residential though with no public transportation is challenging. Also, maybe this is a more of a, mixed use, like a North Broadway or a, Rhino kind of an area that's an industrial type of setup as opposed with mixed uses in there as opposed to residential mixed use. But
So
go ahead, Brian, because I think we're getting off topic here. But
here's how I would describe this process. What most cities have in their comprehensive plan is what's called a future land use map. We're looking 20 and 30 years down the road saying, what do we think is going to go where? That's what this is. A lot of it is based, as John said, on our current zoning because that's what's going to allow those things to happen. But in the red areas, they have a lot of things that can happen, right? In our commercial and industrial districts, we have a lot of land uses. There's a lot of opportunity. In our R1 areas, there's not a lot you can do other than build single-family homes and maybe an ADU. The yellow areas, you can build duplexes and triplexes and things like that. And then in orange, you can build more dense projects. So what I think John's exercise is here's the map that we have. Here's looking down into the future, 20 and 30 years. Here's what we anticipate to happen in these areas. And then that list of policies is how do we get there? Or how do we get there the way that we want to get there? So you include those policies on, whether it's more multimodal transportation or more pedestrian friendly, things like that. You need to think 30 and 40 years down the road and say, what do we want to see here, because these are the policies that are going to guide the work that we do as a planning department. So that's kind of where this exercise is. The parks and stuff, he's just showing where the parks are just to make sure that we're cognizant of where all that information is. Same thing with our train corridors, our train stations, because a lot of those things influence all the things that are going to happen in the next 30 years. So that's what this exercise is about. A lot of the groundwork on the map legend and colors was done 8 years ago. But I think right now we're focusing on those policies. Like, what have we done? Some of those things have to go away because we've accomplished them. Some of them may not be relevant, as Brenda was talking about. So that's what this commission, what we're asking for you now, is to discuss those policies and make sure we keep what's relevant in the plan, what's not relevant anymore comes out. And then if there's anything new that, you know, the housing topic may have been a discussion then, but it is certainly a discussion now that, you know, might need to be brought up in some of these policies.
John, I appreciate you bottom lining the question here, and is that, should we continue with this preserve and enhance for that L4? And I would say, I don't think there's a reason to preserve that for industrial and flex industrial space. So I would agree with your questioning of this as, no, it opens the option for residential development there. And I thank you for bottom lining it for us. I think if we could go that forward, keep that trend going forward with these questions of like, what's the bottom line on these? So that's my opinion, is I don't feel like there's a need to continue to preserve and enhance industrial space just in that area.
One kind of follow-up question to both of these things. Do we have the opportunity to change these transition areas? Or any of these we can't change, we're not changing zoning, not that we can't, we're not changing zoning with any of this, but like, are there other opportunities?
You know, so in this case, I think there is with certain reason. I don't think we want to change R1 areas of stability.
Okay.
I would stay away from that.
Agreed.
But this area is already marked that way. And so in today's plan, it says that this is a potential place to expand residential housing adjacent to this park asset at the fringe of the industrial. And so are you supportive of that going forward to keep that way?
And Chair, Stephen's got a question.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah. Good evening, commissioners. I have
Stephen,
a
we
question.
can't hear you.
I've been hearing
Stephen, we can't hear
attentively to
you.
all your comments. Can this be done in phases to kind of test the waters? Because I think we're all nervous about making the changes too soon. So I don't know how all this works.
Hey, Mark.
Brian, but
Can you?
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Stephen, hold on a second. We're trying to get audio for you.
And Stephen, we'll come back to you so we can hear that. Like, my question is looking at W2, like, is that still a transitionary zone? It's against the greenway, so maybe it is, but it feels like it's a highly utilized area right now. You know, with a lot of work going on. So do we want to, those are the kind of things, like, do we still want to keep those? And I guess there's a couple W2s. And maybe, does that work too? Okay. Are there two Redbird Farms?
Well, W1 is the American Bottling Plant. W2 is Redbird Farms.
There's a South Redbird and a North Redbird or?
No, I think there's just W1, which is on Zunai, which is the American Bottling. Unless I have made a mistake, I don't. Is
The
it?
red area next to L4 to the east of L4 is also labeled W2.
Yes, W2 there to the east is Redbird Farms.
And the W2 to the very south at the Platte River West?
Oh, that's a typo. That should be W3.
Okay.
Caroba Plastics.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so then I'm actually talking about Caroba Plastics, the W3 down south. Is that still someplace we'd want to consider as a transition? Stephen, can you try again?
Is that working now better?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
I've been listening to all the comments from the commissioners. I want to know, I think Brian is our helper here from the city. Can this be done in phases? Because I think we're all nervous that some of the changes might be too quick for some of these zones. So I don't know how all this is planned in terms of maybe having 1, 2, or 3 phases and test the waters.
Yeah, and maybe Brian, could you just touch on again, but I think the intent is this is supposed to guide us to potential changes. This isn't just an automatic change or an overnighter, and it's definitely not a zoning change. It's just a focus or
Use,
a
the
guidance,
land use.
yeah. Go ahead, Steven.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not zoning changes. These are policies that help inform, and John, jump in anytime if I say anything wrong. They're policies that help inform our work plan. So when we get policies, we go back and we look at what we might need to do as a city to get there. Whether it's adopt a new, or revise I'll just bring these up because these are the ones John works on, revise the walk-in wheel plan. If it's something like that, then we go back and look at how much, what's the monetary investment that we have to make in that time investment. And then we can map out, is it a short-term, long-term, midterm kind of goal? We do that further on in our work plan when we go through that, which this group will get the opportunity, I believe, to look at again as well. This kind of just sets these are our aspirational goals that we're trying to get to create.
Right.
And then we start working on how we get there a little bit later.
Kind of like the big picture.
Precisely.
Thank you.
I think with the L4, if we did move forward with that, that would definitely require having our affordable housing policies in place, because I think that it would take that kind of effort and those kind of resources that the city would have to actually do some acquiring some of those sites to make it happen. I don't think it will happen by itself.
The northwest area, that's probably the cheapest rent in the whole city in that area. But I don't know about how old that area is. It's infrastructure. I don't know if they have the water supply up there or the sewage supply up there. But as far as affordable housing, that's probably a good place to start looking.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? I think we want to be able to have the opportunity, I think everyone's saying, to consider this for some sort of residential, whether that's from us or from somebody else, but not to restrict it.
Okay, thank you. That would helps me a lot. All right, Baker Park 2, add community gardens, access to healthy food. And my thoughts on that were, this is a small area. Would there really be, number one, I don't know the demand for these healthy gardens. I know that there's a healthy demand there at Depot Park. Would there be demand here? I don't know for sure. It's something that I need to probably contact Parks to talk about. There's some of our gardens in other parts of towns, we have a sponsor, which is the school. And so that's helpful, but there is no school to partner here with. And there may not be enough demand, and they may require a small pilot project in a city park to see if there is demand. But how do people feel about this policy? Do you feel strongly that this should stay in there? Or do you think that this might not make sense?
Go ahead.
So I have a real sensitivity to food deserts where people, the only access they have to buy food is at a 7-Eleven or a convenience store. That is not this neighborhood. There's a King Soopers, there's a Walmart, I'm not sure what the radius is or whatever, but I'm also supportive of community gardens and that kind of programming. I don't think should be an effort of zoning and planning to necessarily support those things. I think there's lots of other resources for that. And so my focus would be if it's not a food desert, I don't think we need to make that special effort to make sure there's community gardens and other access if it already exists.
I would say I kind of agree that it shouldn't be forced on people, but being that this is a 20, 30-year outlook, I could see that if that parcel, the south piece became affordable housing mid-scale, it could be something that could be integrated into a development as opposed to being like a fully separate effort. But I wouldn't nix it yet because it's potentially a long way out.
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting thing about.
One thing I might point out is one of the efforts that you guys completed recently was our home occupation standards. And people now have the ability to grow food in their backyard, food and plant materials. So like think about, lettuce, tomatoes, things like that, actually sell them out of their front yard 3 days a week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that may be an alternative look at doing something like this where it's on a much smaller scale. So just a thought was something that we've really just completed. We haven't seen it take off the ground, but since those have been approved, some of the folks that originally reached out to us about, being able to plant flowers in their backyards and sell them or produce have already reached out and said they're going to start the licensing process with finance to get started for next year. So,
yeah, and if we're talking about the Baker Park neighborhood, those are the large lots that probably actually have some opportunity there for some of that. So I think that, yeah, so whether it needs to be community gardens or just what we've already done, maybe it doesn't have to be a high priority, but so do we leave this or do we?
Sorry, I got one more question. The being that this is former or current industrial area that we're talking about potentially redeveloping, is there any information on whether these are brownfield sites or not? Because you can't just flip over a contaminated industrial site and expect someone to build a house on it, or it becomes prohibitively costly to do that.
And before you answer it, we're talking about for the whole neighborhood. We're not just talking about the one L4 site. The last one was for one site, but this is more of the neighborhood in general. Is that an accurate statement, or are we talking about maybe a more specific site, which I would then agree with that question?
I'm pretty sure that there is somewhere in those areas, there will be environmental sites. As opposed to, do I know of specifically any of those sites where that L4 is pointed out? I do not know for sure. I couldn't tell you that right now. So, but you're right. That could flow that whole plan. Yeah. Or it would just make it'd be another step that the city would have to mitigate. Just for example, we are currently looking at partnering with Denver on a brownfield study of Broadway. And so on Broadway, there were historically gas stations and different body shops that there are probably some properties that are polluted on Broadway too that we want to identify and potentially clean up. So it's possible to clean up property. General Ironworks had it been cleaned up. But yes, that would make it more complicated, more expensive.
And I don't think there's a specific site for a community garden right now. As John notes, there's no schools to partner with in the area. Generally, at least from a planning side, you see community gardens located at churches and at schools. There's civic and institutional uses where you have a lot of people gathering that provide those opportunities. So I think his note there is it might require a pilot project with our city park because that's probably the largest institutional area that we have in that area.
Stephen, any thoughts from you? Oh, sorry, and then no. Yeah.
I would just second everything that Aaron said as far as I generally think when you have too many goals, you really have no goals at all. So like if this isn't a priority for this area, then I would take it out and focus on the other pieces. I did have a question about when we're done with this process, are these policies still going to be labeled as Baker Park, or are they going to be labeled as Northwest?
Northwest.
Okay.
Yeah. They're just that way now for your benefit.
Right. So we need to be, when we're thinking about keeping them in, taking them out, changing them, we need to be thinking about it as right now, or it previously, it was labeled as a Baker Park policy, and in the future, it will be labeled as a Northwest policy, and those might mean different things because it covers a different scope.
Yes, and so if we do, if for example, if these BP1 becomes Northwest 1, because of the way we're going, the direction we're going with going from 13 to 6, we're going to have to start being probably more specific about what area that's referencing, because obviously that's not going to apply to Broadway and Bates.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on. Unless there's last call on the BP2.
Just, Stephen, are you good?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, next.
Okay, so the next two I thought looked pretty good. BP3, encourage pedestrian scale block sizes, amenities, and facilities. There's a potential to unlock affordable housing opportunities up there on the hill through construction of some new streets that would complete the grid system that are not there right now. There are some areas there on West Adriatic, and these aren't there right now, but there's a opportunity there for a new West Adriatic and a new West Caspian. And then that would open up additional lots where people could split off those large backyards and then build new housing. So that seemed still pretty relevant to me.
And so I'm going back to Noah's question, not to go backwards, but I think if we do provide these additional notes, maybe to kind of help identify what we're talking about with these, because like on our agenda here, it's only got BP1. It doesn't have your additional notes and so it doesn't reflect. So if this becomes Northwest 1, it could be Northwest 1 in Baker Park or something along those lines. And then because these are a little more specific where you're talking about West Adriatic, West Caspian Place, or the East-West Dartmouth Bike Facility, those are pretty specific, so clear where those are going to be at. So, okay.
Yeah, I would collapse those down into the specific goals, because these just don't apply across the whole Northwest. Right.
So you're saying that these should be like subsets of a policy?
I think you could just include them in the description of the goal of like, this one is what? Encourage pedestrian block sizes, amenities, and facilities uses transition in the Baker Park neighborhood, like include it. Don't lose that granularity of where this is important, because it's clearly important to Baker Park, but maybe not some of the other areas that are in Northwest.
Yes. So these will have to be wordsmithed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's helping me to also.
Yeah, sorry, I think that was essentially what I was getting at the beginning of like, why don't we call this piece Northwest and call everything on the southeast corner of this section something else, because they're split by a river and a highway and a light rail. So calling them the same Northwest region doesn't seem productive. That's my point.
Could it fit in with then, would that be the north? So add a 7th? We're not trying to change these maps too much. You said a block or two, but it is a good point. I mean, the reality of this section of town, the Northwest, is very different than the R2 right above Cinderella City or above the city center.
That is understood. However, what I'm kind of a little bit worried about is to just isolate that area, because that's kind of what the city's history is to isolate that area. And so I do kind of like showing how it can be connected to the rest of the city, and this map does that pretty well. You can see how the trail system works to get across those barriers and get down to the light rail and all of that. So, I understand where David is coming from, that, this area, there is definitely a difference there.
Maybe that should be our first policy is integrating these two neighborhoods in some way, you know, that we can make those connections and really enhance those bikeways and connections. I mean, I think there's talk about Dartmouth, but is Dartmouth really the right place? It's a very busy corridor. You know, is there an opportunity for a bridge coming down across from Harvard Gulch West that's, you know, just north of the, I forget which street that is, but some other connection to be able to actually connect it into the neighborhood as opposed to having them go down to a very busy intersection for pedestrians.
Yeah, I don't think we need to create new zones as long as we're being specific about where these strategies apply.
There's a lot of different ways you could divide it up.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I like
And we
your-
probably will hear some from council, I'm sure, too.
Your thought process of why you're not disconnecting it does make a lot of sense, so, and appreciate your thought there. Okay, moving back
that-
on to, yeah.
I was gonna say, keep that handy, because I think it comes back around on the southwest area as well, where Santa Fe kind of splits a section.
If we get to Southwest today. Let's keep on moving. All right.
All right.
I think we're in agreement. These two seem pretty good. Unless anybody
BP.
has additional,
Both BP3 and BP4, you're good with them?
I think so. Others thoughts? Nope. No? Yeah.
I don't think this is stated as a policy, so saying it will be key to integrating the neighborhood, like, what is the policy? I would prefer this be phrased as like what it is we're trying to do. So the Dartmouth Avenue bike lane exists in order to better integrate the neighborhood with the Englewood Light Rail Station. What is the policy that we're, trying to implement? So I would just like it to be rephrased as opposed to will be key, which to me isn't the right phrasing for a policy.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was kind of a strange, awkward phrasing as well.
And I think you've noted there'll be some wordsmithing on these, so I assume once we've kind of had these discussions, then we'll get another version of them and we can all say, yay, that's amazing.
Yes, you will have another crack at this. Yeah.
Okay, I think we move.
BP5, improve access to and facilities of the neighborhood parks. Harvard Gulch Trail has been improved through the Northwest Greenbelt. There is additional east-west connection that could be made to the Mary Carter Trail along Wesley Avenue, but it must overcome an existing railroad barrier. And that could help people get to the Mary Carter Greenway and also the Evans Station. I thought that still looked pretty good.
Yeah, agreed. I like you said, the Harvard Gulch is already, seems like that's gotten some improvements. But there's still that gap on Wesley, and it comes right into the middle of the Baker Park neighborhood, so makes sense. Okay.
BP6, develop recreation in the park programming for close to home services.
What are close to home services?
Yeah, that's, it seems like what they were promoting was bring Parks and Rec classes or activities away from, normally these happen at Maui Center or the Oxford Rec Center and potentially maybe some other, maybe like Hosanna athletic fields, but they were advocating bringing those to the people. But I'm not sure, I'm not sure if there's support from that for our Parks and Rec department. Probably have to talk to them about that as well.
Was there a desire to put like an actual rec center over in this area? And I mean, it feels like it's obviously a very narrow strip of Englewood, but could there be an opportunity to, have an agreement with Denver and have some sort of benefit to the overall community, because we do have a school site which with a lot of open space. You know, could there be some larger benefit or maybe even some sort of shared cost as well?
It's an idea.
I'd be curious, are there examples of what, are people asking for something specific when they're talking about whatever these programs would be?
This is as specific, I think, as it was.
I guess, okay, I get that's a good answer then, because I think without more specificity, I wouldn't want to support vague indications of programming that the city's spending money on and no one maybe is demanding it. But I think the concept is great if there's demand for it. If there's not demand for it, though, it doesn't make sense.
I'm in support of, I mean, this one being non-specific, but I think it kind of speaks to the overall connectivity of this neighborhood to the body of Inglewood, and that being a challenge. And honestly, that's not really stated clearly in any of these goals, and I feel like a lot of these things are pointing towards that of, you know, it's off in the northwest corner, it's bifurcated by industrial areas, and like I said, I don't think this is a great policy goal here, but I do think a great policy goal is reconnecting this area to Inglewood and making it accessible to Inglewood services. So if we can augment that in some way, I think that would be great.
Go, Brenda.
Okay, yeah, I'll just piggyback on that, creating trails and bikeways to get it here. But I was just gonna say that, you know, the original Parks bond was over $50 million, and it was put together based on feedback from people, and there wasn't a recreation facility suggested, even at $52 million. So I don't think that, we need to be a specific recreation facility, but that you could just tie this in, like he said, in other priorities of blending in trails. And yeah, that's it.
And I will also note there are actually two relatively close recreation centers, College View and Athmar Recreation Center, so kind of goes to support that. Neither of them are in Inglewood, but I think you could, much like it's not a food desert, there's, you know, a Walmart nearby, there's other options, so maybe I like the connection of it, but maybe not a recreation focused one. Okay.
All right, I want to follow that up with, what elements do you believe are missing from the Northwest Greenbelt and Baker Park today that you'd like to see?
Oh, okay, I don't know how to word this, but it's, when you've got the residential area butted up to the industrial area, and people still take their dogs along the sidewalk, they would like to see more pedestrian use of that area. They're still using the area like a homeowner would, walking their dogs. I see them take lunch at the parks. But you have very, very wide streets meant for big, big, giant trucks. So I don't know how you would word that, how you make, other than just saying more pedestrian friendly, that invite more housing opportunities. You know, I mean, if you're a developer and you're like, well, I'd have to develop this whole street or what have you. But I see a lot of kids riding their bikes up and down. What's the one next to Tejon?
Zunai?
No, the other one, yeah,
Vallejo?
that's that one, right.
Raritan?
Because I take the dogs there a lot. So that's really the only thing is I could say is just to make it more pedestrian friendly.
Has there been any, like at the open houses or any other feedback given from residents of this neighborhood on the comp plan update?
Well, I have not looked too closely at the sign-in sheets to determine that, but my guess would be it's highly unlikely.
Is there a way to solicit feedback from a more targeted population? Because I agree, like, I mean, I'm kind of guessing a little bit about this neighborhood because I don't spend much time there. So I don't feel that entitled to comment on it.
Well, that's a good idea. You know, maybe we can talk to our communications department to see if we could target some outreach to just that particular place, neighborhood.
And we are working on putting this process online on our Inglewood Engage page so we can try to reach more larger audience than we did with our open house. So we already are working on that with communications. We've talked to them about doing that. So we're always open to ideas. We meet with our communications department every 2 weeks to try to go out with additional outreach strategies. Honestly, in this area, probably the most beneficial outreach I've been a part of in my 2.5 years here was when we had our neighborhood nights up in Baker Park. And it was during Code Next, and we actually went out to, I think, 3 different parks to try to solicit information. And that was the most feedback that I had received from anyone in that neighborhood in my very short tenure here. Unfortunately, the scope of this project doesn't bleed into the neighborhood nights timeline. Otherwise, we would happily go out there and talk to folks. But that was probably the best one, and I think we gave that advice to the folks in Denver too. Is if you're trying to get information in these areas, you have to go out there.
Yeah, I would look to a council member that represents this area, and I just, yeah, it feels very awkward to sit here and think I know what's best for this neighborhood without hearing from any of them. So.
I have a issue with, some of these trails are good. They'd be good to have and would be very useful for the neighborhood to develop the neighborhood. But I always come back to the rail trail. The rail trail is one of the main trails we're gonna have in Inglewood, north to south. That's been in the works for, 10 years? The Oxford Bridge has been like 6 years to do that. And the bridge over Hampton, I don't see that as ever getting done. So that's one of the main trails I see in the city, and it's not gonna happen. It is got sections of it.
So I feel for your frustration about how long things take, but I do have some good news about that rail trail in the fact that the Oxford Bridge, they are about ready to put that out to bid. So they are looking for someone to build it, and they also have put together. They have hired a design consultant to do full design for the entire rest of the rail trail. So that is, after many years of delay, it is moving forward. So you have to kind of be patient and keep pushing them.
I'm too old to be patient.
Yeah.
Keep pushing it, Carl. That's a good thing. Okay, Aaron?
I was just going to say, I think to sum up this section and the Baker Park region is, obviously a concern for connectivity to the rest of Inglewood in terms of services and access. But also it seems like there's just a dearth of input from that area on what they need. So just areas to address.
Okay, BP7, increase multimodal connectivity between the neighborhood area and the core of the community and the light rail station. Is this redundant with other policies? West Dartmouth and South Zuni bicycle lanes have been implemented. The alternative off-street connection via Harvard Gulch and Mary Carter Trail is now in place. There could be an additional east-west connection to Mary Carter Trail along Wesley Avenue. But it sounds like to me from what the previous input is that although these are good accomplishments, the city still needs to keep working on those things for this neighborhood. Additional policy questions. Apparently so I've even forgotten about some of this stuff already. Evans Avenue, I think is a potential future bus rapid transit route. I think I already asked that question about redeveloping industrial block on the south side of the Northwest Greenbelt as residential. I think we've answered that as well. Any viewpoints on Evans Avenue in Baker Park?
That's an RTD project?
Yeah.
We have such a small 3 blocks
Yeah.
portion of it. I mean, it would probably help make that connection again to the neighborhood, to the Evans station and to Broadway and all those things. So, I mean, yes, supportive of it. But I don't know that we would have a huge influence on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm supportive. I think it makes sense to connect, DU and down to, Colorado Boulevard, which will also have the BRT. And I mean, there's lots of opportunities, but not a huge impact on Englewood.
Okay, fair enough. All right, South Platte River. So I thought that these policies made the least amount of sense in the plan. I don't think I had too many reds, but I got a lot of red here.
Do we have a map to look at for this one real quick too? It's kind of hard to.
Okay. Let me read it and then I'll go back.
Okay.
Okay. SP1, add targeted duplexes and workforce housing products. The near-term residential potential here, I believe, is pretty low. Area is primarily industrial with a number of mobile home parks. What I think might make more sense is supportive housing for homeless people. Portions of the area are identified for long-term residential transit-oriented development dependent on significant infrastructure upgrades, and that would include having that bridge over Santa Fe being built. That would open up this area to TOD. There are a lot of other infrastructure things in this area that would need to be upgraded to make it happen.
Just one question. I'll go back to the map. There are a lot of people who would really like a bridge over Santa Fe, but Englewood would have to coordinate with RTD and CDOT, wouldn't they? And kind of seek funding that way. I mean, we can make it a goal, but
the bridge over Santa Fe?
A bridge over Santa Fe.
It is in our light rail stationary master plan. It would be very expensive.
Yeah.
And it is probably a pretty low priority at this point. But yes, there would have to be coordination between all those people.
And the railroad.
Yeah, and the railroad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, rail trail, involves the railroad as well.
So this is northwest. Can you go to the south? Or is this?
It's part of it.
Got it. Thank you. So it's the Platte River South, Platte River West. Which areas are we talking about for?
I think it's really
South Platte River.
I think it's really all of that from the Yale line all the way south to the very end near those Sheridan apartments. But I don't. Do you see single family and townhomes being built here? I'm not sure how that got past us, but this consultant put that in there. But I'm thinking we should eliminate that.
Yes.
That said, not sure why we would not want to preserve. Go ahead. You're on to the next one.
If I could interject real quick,
Please.
for those of you who have laptops, if you go out to the meeting portal for tonight's meeting, the PowerPoint's on there, so that might help you be able to navigate back to the maps you're looking for. And again, we apologize that didn't get into your packet.
Thank you. Okay, so SP2, John?
SB2, preserve and enhance.
I'm sorry, 1 second. I just want to hang on this first one. I mean, maximizing housing adjacent to transit corridors and stations. I mean, the TOD. You said portions of the area are identified for long-term residential TOD dependent on significant infrastructure projects. That's like the bridges we're talking about. That's like, what are the barriers there? Is this something we should completely rule out for at least mixed use to include housing? Or are you saying this is just something we should just forget about for housing in the next 20 to 30 years? I don't agree with the targeted of like duplexes and workforce, like being that specific, but.
No, I would still probably talk about development in those same terms that I was describing of TOD dependent on a bridge connection. So yes, I would think that would still stay. We would still want some kind of policy that talked about that. But this specific policy as it's worded,
Yes. Agree. The way the conversation was going, I didn't want to completely exclude the potential for housing, especially this close to transit in Inglewood for the long term.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would also point out that I think a lot of the like riverfront area is underutilized as residential. So I think if we really are talking about a 20 to 30 year time span and not a 5-year time span, I think it would make sense to continue to look ahead to how we can eventually develop housing in those areas.
Very good.
But not duplexes, like higher density, most likely.
Nothing specific.
Yeah, just housing, more housing.
And take advantage of
SB2,
the corridor. Yeah.
SB2, preserve and enhance key employment parcels. This is less dense in terms of employment or industrial parcels. There's typically, they're really more storage or very low density type of industrial uses for the most part. There is this one business called Kuroba Plastics that does have 159 employees, but the main thing of this is typically there's these very large warehouse properties on the other side of the river that don't really employ a lot of people. So I'm not sure, based on the desire to keep this as a long-term TOD, maybe this is not necessary, this policy.
Yeah, I think the key word there is preserve, and I kind of get like keep it as is. I mean, it's just very, yes, preserve employment opportunities, but it's inefficient land use in the area. It's sparse. There's going to be opportunity to utilize this land for other uses. So, yeah, I'm in agreement of either reworking this or eliminating or rephrasing or whatever it is, but keeping things as is, as they are there, is not something I would advocate for.
I guess north of Dartmouth, I feel like I might say that does make more sense to keep that as is. It's next to the treatment plant. It's in, right off Santa Fe. It doesn't have frontage to the river, but the south of Dartmouth maybe is a different opportunity there. And sorry, go ahead, no.
Oh, I was just going to say, if we're collapsing these down from the neighborhood level to the northwest level, in the prior one that was phrased the same way, we had talked about removing it. So I would just, again, we're still in the northwest area. So I would say keep with the same policy approach of taking it out across the northwest region.
Yeah, I could see an evolution of this as to, support employment opportunities while maximizing land use on previously industrial parcels, something like that.
Steven, any thoughts that you have online?
No.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? Starting to get the hang of it now.
SP3, increase neighborhood serving retail and access to services and restaurants near employment centers. And I didn't really feel that this would be an area that would really, we'd see this either. In this, I just didn't think that we'd, I suppose down farther south along River Point, there, I guess there's that is somewhat industrial there. But there's kind of a whole shopping center that evolved there. So I don't know, maybe that's not that relevant either. But it's hard to see that we're going to have a bunch of restaurants pop up there. But
Yeah, I mean, I think the River Point it's surprising that is what worked there in my mind. It feels like that could be so much more with the river and with the golf course there, but it's very successful. But how do we that's already there? So we don't need to recreate that. We can look at the housing and the other things that can be around that area. No? All right. David.
SP4, develop enhanced bikeway on Dartmouth Avenue and a future pedestrian bike bridge from the Inglewood Station to the trail and employment uses west of Santa Fe. Dartmouth Bikeway is implemented, can be improved, and the PED Bridge is a long-term goal. So I think that's still pretty relevant.
I agree. It's still relevant and would love to see the pedestrian bridge, that's a long-term goal. I also think this develop enhanced bikeway should still be considered like from what it is right now, not just that it was implemented. We were talking in the other room. It's very narrow. Having the parking, crossing the bike lane leads to often having cars parked over into the bike lane. For me, I'm much more comfortable riding off Dartmouth because there's lower traffic streets. So to me, if that is going to be a useful bike corridor, and I think it very much could be given the connections, the city's going to have to give serious consideration to removing some parking and trying to, widen it, add some protection to make that more comfortable for cyclists to use.
Thank you for that.
Agreed.
Has there been any bike accidents on Dartmouth bike trail, the West Dartmouth? I mean, I would never ride that. In rush hour, it's a suicidal trip in my mind.
No, I don't. I really am not aware of of what might have occurred there in the past.
And then they're going to put some circles in there, some roundabouts. So, not sure how that's going to help anything. It'll slow things down, but which is probably
we got quite a bit of feedback about that here tonight on those circles.
yeah.
I mean, I think you said it. Theoretically, it will slow people down, and I think in reality will hopefully help that. But that doesn't mean it's a better pedestrian corridor. But it hopefully does mean people are slowing down some.
I mean, I think the circles are generally good. I've lived somewhere where they added a bunch of circles before, and it suddenly became much easier to drive through, let alone, in addition to biking, because you're not crossing across traffic. So I think the circles can be helpful for safety as well.
But I think the thought here is the enhancement of a bikeway is still very much a opportunity.
Okay. SP5, develop partnerships for increasing access to and quality of the South Platte River as a unique regional amenity. And SP6, maintain north-south connectivity west of Santa Fe with the South Platte River Trail, which connects to the regional trail system. And I think those are, Mary Carter Greenway is planned and managed primarily by South Suburban. So we do need to partner with them, and there is the opportunity to continue development of a dual trail system on either side of the river, which it does now exist farther south. So I think those are relevant.
What's the possibility of getting some retail down there? You got bike trails there already, and you got roads down there that are fairly easy to get to. Some of the industrial areas down there, they could buy them out and then put some shopping centers, River Point shopping centers in there.
Yeah, the only thing I would have to say to that is that there aren't probably a lot of more future River Points. And the reason I say that is because retail, brick and mortar is really contracting. And we're seeing places, high vacancies. People are moving more and more to the online retail experience. And I don't see a lot of those kinds of shopping centers being developed in a central city location like this anymore.
Carl, when you say down there, which area are you talking about?
The apartments that are down there, just before you get to Hampton on the river.
The northwest corner of Santa Fe.
Yeah, that's from there on down, it's industrial. From there north, it's all industrial along in there. And if there's some retail in there, I mean, it's right on the river. It's easy to get to. Seems like a lot of people would go down there. I mean, River Point that's not on the river, but it's going like crazy down there.
I think I agree with what you're saying, John, though, of like River Point's already absorbed the big box that's going to happen, and anything smaller is not going to be successful unless it's got a lot of housing around it, since it's going to be sort of a weird location to travel to shop. That would be my concern.
And as we're talking about maybe the south end of the northwest section, are we calling that Floyd? Is that Yale? I'm sorry, yeah, Floyd or Yale or Hampton? Where does that end?
Can you be more specific about the question?
What is the south end of the Northwest District?
Well, right there on the west side of Santa Fe, it would be the border with the Sheridan Apartments. I can't remember the name of that Sheridan apartment complex because they keep changing it. The Avalon or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, the Avalon.
That's where that southern border would be, but not quite getting to the highway. There's the apartments between there and there, so. That is probably Girard, approximately. Girard, Inglewood Parkway.
Okay, because those apartments are actually in Sheridan. I got you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So keeping those red areas as, you know, potential for that redevelopment along the river there, I think makes a lot of sense, whether it's commercial. I don't know that it's another River Point, but I think obviously those apartments are there. Could that be additional housing between there and Dry Gulch? You know, I think could be a great opportunity, which is what we're showing here.
So I have a question, and maybe this is where the duplexes and workforce housing came from. I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 100 units of housing in those mobile home parks to the west of Santa Fe. It's marked as a a catalytic activity zone, but there's nothing really speaking to future plans for that. Now, to be fair, affordable housing is almost always the most, or I mean, mobile homes are almost always the most affordable housing in any given community. And these are important for a lot of people to afford to live in Inglewood. But obviously they have a limited useful life. So I'm kind of feeling that maybe this duplexes and workforce was kind of focused on what happens to these mobile home parks, which makes me think, yeah, what is going to happen to those mobile home parks and what do we want to happen there? There's housing there now. It's kind of interspersed among some industrial or light industrial. But there's really nothing in this plan that speaks to those areas where people are currently living. So yeah, I'm just curious about that. If we're taking out that piece, which I think we should, about duplexes and workforce housing, what can we replace that with that focuses on, not an insignificant number of housing units?
The station area plan, master plan does cover south of Dartmouth to Girard Inglewood Parkway. And then farther out west where that orange is, all the way to that railroad spur. And that plan would say that the mobile home parks there are going to go away with more of a higher density TOD. There are mobile parks to the north of Dartmouth that most likely are going to stay there because they're farther away from the station. And quite frankly, mobile home parks are actually very profitable. It's kind of like a car lot. They actually make a lot of money. And there's very little investment, and that they make significant money for rents, and they are unlikely to go away. They may improve. That might be the hope, that over time that they would become higher quality.
Nationwide, the trend is more and more for venture capital to buy out the land under mobile home parks to increase lot rents. It's a huge issue in Colorado and across the nation. I think it would be wise to have some awareness and intention around preserving some affordability in these places. Very profitable, but for who? And how are those people extracting the value out and the wealth out of the folks who are living there?
If I may, that's a sewage plant. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of investment next to the sewage plant, if we were to have any plant at all. It would be for Englewood to buy that property and create some more of that transitional small homes like Denver did further up north. But I don't think that we need to worry about that lot getting built out because it stinks. It just stinks right in there.
I mean, to your point, Aaron, about those being affordable already and being affordable housing being an issue, is there any reason to not say 20 years from now that still might be the best case scenario for someone who's living in a RV? Like, I think, it's not necessarily desirable land, so I don't know why I don't see anyone jockeying for position to buy it to do something else. Not to say there won't be, but would it make sense to not necessarily encourage redevelopment there and say, look, if this can stay as is without further investment as an affordable option, what's wrong with that?
So yes, we don't make decisions for property owners necessarily. So we're not going to say, oh yes, you've got to necessarily do this, but we're trying to anticipate what the pressures might be on people, or just we kind of assume that they have a profit motive, that for the right price that they'll want to sell. But yes, there's so many things that this would be contingent on in terms of today. It's not going to happen today. There'd have to be so many more improvements that the city would have to make that viable. But you're right. There's also the desire, I think, that's much more acute right now than it was 7 years ago about this affordability issue. And there's a lot more sensitivity towards these groups of people. That before it was like, oh, it's just a mobile home park. But yes, now it's like, oh, gee, that's a source of affordability in our community for the poorest. And now there's even, so I find interesting this that Brenda mentioned up just farther, a little bit farther north of our border, Denver has put together a kind of an air, and I haven't even seen it with my own eyes, but it's like kind of a transitional housing development of, I think, tiny homes, maybe that's what it is. And it's like, that could be a viable thing that could be pursued in these areas.
I think that was getting to my next question is it possible to earmark land like this that's already being used like that to say if it were sold and redeveloped, it has to be at least some higher than normal percentage of affordable units? Something like that.
Well, that's going to be interesting because the city, obviously, the Affordable Housing Task Force presented their findings last night, and one of their findings is you still have more work to do. Then you need to constitute an affordable housing commission. And I would probably agree because yes, it's such a complicated issue that it's not like you can just put a few policies in place and it's done. It's going to be a generational thing for many, many years. So that's very interesting. And I think one of the other just blanket recommendations was 25% requirement of affordable housing from any developer. Now, they didn't put a lot of conditions on that because they're thinking globally, but that would be, as time goes on, there may be distinctions about that where, obviously the council still has to decide what they're going to ultimately land on. And it could be that in certain areas of the city, they want a higher percentage, and other areas they're willing to take a lower percentage. So there's a lot of variabilities that we don't know.
I think just to cap, and I know we need to move on, just to cap this, I mean, any displacement of existing affordable housing we need to take into consideration. There are, like I said, a not insignificant number of units here. It's a catalytic activity area. These people are probably already at high risk for displacement. Also, there's lots of tools and options, especially around mobile home parks. Could be an opportunity for a community land trust, like Elevation Community Land Trust, who's already been doing work with mobile home parks across the state, as well as co-ops where the homeowners there that own their mobile home units could share an ownership of the land. So I think that's just really important. So often these types of communities in micro neighborhoods just get swept aside because they're in the stinky area or they're in a disposable housing unit, and these are people's homes.
All right. Well, thank you for all of that. And this will be something that I will be wrestling with and thinking about how this might be portrayed. And it may be where the recommendation or the policy is further exploration of this and making changes to some of the assumptions that have been made in the past. Okay. I think we're into Cushing Park now. Cushing Park 1, implement complete street treatments along Bates, Dartmouth, and Floyd, which links to the future rail trail and other regional trails to the west, and retail, employment, transit, and residential uses along Broadway. Dartmouth has been somewhat implemented, but still could be made better. There's still opportunities for Floyd. Floyd bicycle lanes have been implemented as well. I guess Bates is the one that hasn't been touched yet. Still probably relevant.
I think getting back to Noah's comment earlier about biking on Dartmouth, is there any thought about, rather than throwing money at Dartmouth, which is, let's be honest, it's not exactly a established safe bike space, to do that on Eastman or something. I live on Eastman, like east of Broadway, and if I'm ever going to Broadway, I bike on Eastman, not Dartmouth.
Yes, so I'll just talk a little bit about our bicycle planning philosophy here at Inglewood. So because we are a small city surrounded by Denver, we have to kind of pay a lot of attention to what Denver is doing, or what is our regional connections. And Denver has for many years identified Dartmouth as its major east-west bicycle route that happens to go through Inglewood. But there's Denver over there. And so you could theoretically say, okay, well, when it comes to our city, we're going to divert you a block down and you're going to have to go this way and then you'll have to come back up. We could do that. But our philosophy is that we know that bicyclists, that these certain bicyclists are going to want to do the kind of bicyclists that take these really long rides, and they're not going to want to do that, and they're going to feel pretty comfortable on Dartmouth as it is. And so our first thought is to, okay, we need to make this better for those people. But then we also need to identify alternative routes, which we consider more neighborhood routes. They're just Inglewood centric to the north and south. And so in the walk and wheel plan, Bates Avenue is that alternative. Farther south, we would probably say Floyd Avenue is that alternative. And then there's a lot of signalization becomes important too. The Eastman, one of the issues with Eastman is that when you get to Broadway, there's no signal. So we kind of have a two-tiered focus on our bicycle improvements that way.
Yeah, I think the streets that are identified make a lot of sense, and I would leave this the way it is.
Okay, CP2.
Provide additional pedestrian crossings along Dartmouth to Cushing Park and regional trail connections. To me, this seems like there's already ped crossings provided at Broadway, Bannock, Eladi, and Inca. And so I'm kind of questioning this. Is this really, do we need more crossings?
I have a feeling those were probably added in the last number of years. So maybe we can, if you have that in a couple other places, the notes of these were added in 2016 or anything like that, if we want to document it, but I think, like you had noted, they're kind of already there.
CP3, improve bicycle facilities along Eladi. That looks pretty good. High priority north-south route for next wave of walk and wheel projects. And CP4, increase neighborhood serving retail and access to services and restaurants along Broadway and near future redevelopment areas. We have seen some significant additions on Broadway there: Chop Shop, Kaladi Coffee, Birdsall and Company, and Dunkin' Donuts. So hopefully there could be more of that in the future. CP5, add targeted mixed use and denser housing products to provide a variety of housing types. And CP6, promote the addition of alternative and larger housing options to accommodate families. New housing developments have sprung up along Broadway and Denver near Evans stations. We haven't seen that so much yet here, but we think they're coming. And the area has seen significant townhome redevelopment featuring larger size housing units on smaller lots. So those seems to be still relevant.
There was some commentary on these, and I don't remember if it was specifically Cushing Park or other neighborhoods that use similar language. On the ones that say promote the addition of alternative and larger housing options, it seemed like there was, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a lack of clarity around what larger housing options means. Does that mean denser housing options? Does that mean, duplexes, triplexes, or does it just mean larger single-family homes, which doesn't seem like something that the city needs to prioritize? So I would maybe just clarify what that is intended to mean. If the idea is that, you know, larger housing options means something other than just a larger single-family unit, then that could be clarified.
And maybe clarification of the alternative also, but one of the things I think we pulled from was the neighborhood housing, I forget which, or maybe it was comp plan update, I don't remember what it was that people tend to move out of Inglewood when they start having a family because there aren't the larger housing. I'm not saying that I'm advocating for that, but I think that was one of the concerns that was noted. So I think it's just something we want to make sure that we're considering as we're talking about the larger housing options. Aaron, would you? So what was alternative, I guess, maybe for, what does that mean as well? Remote alternative and larger housing?
Okay, but need to clarify those.
I would also ask what it means to promote.
Promote probably means align our zoning to attract that kind of development. Probably.
And with that, with our zoning updates, this is an area that would be considered still allowable for some of the higher densities, R1, R13, I think. I'm sorry, R1C. So there would be still the option to have some of those larger duplexes and triplexes and things like that through this neighborhood, which would align and still with this, like, we're not saying to put this in R1A. We're talking about having it here in R1C.
Correct.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Steven, you good?
I am, thank you.
Okay. Keep moving on.
CP7, encourage additional green space and amenities at future redevelopment sites. I think this predates some of the developments that have occurred. The general iron PUDs have been required to reserve space for a future rail trail. Obtaining significant green space now from future developments will be very challenging, I think. So I'm kind of a little bit up in the air about trying to encourage additional green space and amenities at future redevelopment sites when they've happened.
So again, I would just, if we're focusing on the Northwest region as a whole, I think there could be opportunity for this on the west side of the river more than in the Cushing Park neighborhood in particular. So maybe we keep it in, with that expanded scope to the Northwest region more broadly. Because I agree that in the Cushing Park neighborhood, there's probably not those opportunities, but perhaps those other sites we talked about earlier on the other side of the river.
CP8, invest in park improvements at Cushing Park. I think, as far as I remember, I think our improvements to Cushing Park have been confined to the parking lot and skate park primarily. And I'd have to go see what the bond says about Cushing Park.
The bond, I went to the Cushing Park meeting. So there is a dog park going on the west side of Inca. There is improvement to the playground. And there will probably be just some improvement to the general landscape with the change out of the irrigation system. So I don't think that we have to have this then in the overall parks plan, but I don't, that's just so you know.
Yeah, I think if it's in the bond plan already to make these changes. We could probably take it out of the comp plan because it's, you know,
Okay.
it's happening. Yeah.
All right, well, I'm very sad that we only got through one.
Yeah, we'll do better
Yeah.
next time.
I think that one was kind of a harder one. I think some of these get easier. But we may have to consider, based on our timeline, we may have to consider homework for the group. But with that, I think I'm going to have to turn it back over to the chair to finish out the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fogarel. Once we got into it, I feel like we got a lot better, so hopefully we'll do better next time. And if there is any homework, feel free to assign it. I think also these maps are very helpful, so I think being able to now go back to the information that was provided and tie it to these will hopefully expedite that process moving forward too, after we've discussed through it. So with that, we can go to staff's choice. Brent?
The only one I have is mainly regarding this. Is there, that next meeting, we got to get through 5 of these? So is there a better way for us to present this information that might, like, do we need to provide paper copies of the maps so we don't need to flip back and forth? Should we include more policies on each screen to go through? Is there anything that you all think might help us get through this? And it's not because we want this done. It's because we already have a set timeline and we have to go to council on February 24th, I believe. I know, or February 18th. I know it's coming up really quick to present the update for this section. So we've got to do our work here before we can get there. So
I think both of those suggestions could help. I think, John, how you bottom lines, how we kind of, I think when we start getting on track was like, hey, this is what I'm asking, you know, like on some of those, certainly would be helpful in taking that approach and maybe just kind of breezing through some of the ones that are clearly this one still applies. Clearly this is still in progress, but this is the one I'm kind of questioning, like focusing in on those. And then also maybe just a commitment from the commission to read ahead of time and to come prepared.
And now that we've got most of it ready, we can get the agenda for next time out a lot quicker. And you'll have extra time to kind of work on it as an individual and then come back and present your findings at the next meeting.
So, yeah, so maybe let's not focus on green anymore. Let's just focus on yellow and red.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, was instead of keeping them in number order, perhaps present them in sort of categories that way. So like we could look at all the green ones at once for an area and say, any comments on any of these? And then if not, then we move on. And I think if instead of jumping back and forth between green, yellows, and reds, we just kind of take those greens off the table, then we'll be able to move a lot faster. So I would maybe regroup them that way. And I think that would help with efficiency.
I liked Brian's comment about having the maps printed out so we're not wasting time flipping back and forth as well.
And maybe some clear definitions on which areas we're discussing, because even some of these maps, it's hard to tell where the distinction between them is. Between the northeast, when you look at this map, you can still see Cushing Park, but is it, so it's just the area? Trying to just delineate them a little bit more clearly on which ones we're looking at would be helpful.
John, maybe instead of labeling those old policies based on those old maps, we just combine all the area policies together now and say, these are all the policies that affected this area in the previous. We're just thinking out loud. We can work on how we fine tune it.
Okay.
I think we did have some detail around how some of these policies affect a certain neighborhood within an area, that we don't want to lose that granularity because they may still be applicable, but
I think we can still have that noted, maybe like the BP, could be in there, but let's prioritize them by the whole area. And if we want to add some of that granularity, I think the northwest was probably the hardest area.
Yeah.
The southwest probably will be a little bit challenging also, just because of its, disparate, areas. But I do think we're getting there. And then the only other question I had is, what do we do with the information that was taken tonight at the public meeting? How does that get integrated in, or not integrated or presented?
Yes, I'll summarize that. Basically, I'll probably put together the same kind of chart and show what the responses were, and then also the sticky notes, what those said as well. So you will get a complete package of that information as well.
Okay, and if we can get that early enough, maybe everyone can at least, especially on the northwest, look at any of the comments that were made and make sure that we're all still in alignment of that, so we can jump back to that really quickly if we need to, but hopefully move on very quickly to northeast and the remaining. Okay. Good. Okay, all right. Staff's choice. Brian? Nick, you can go to attorney's choice too? Yeah.
Hi. There's nothing for attorney's choice today. Thank you.
Thank you. John or Brian, anything for staff? No?
I have nothing.
Thank you. Commissioner's choice, I'll go down. Carl?
Nothing here.
David?
I'm good.
Okay. Aaron?
Nothing, thanks.
No.
I'm good.
Eric?
I too am good.
Awesome. Steven?
I'm good as well. Thank you.
I'll just make one minor note. I did get to stop by South Platte Renews Park, their research center, their was it the Pilot and Research Center? It's quite cool if you get a chance to go down there, take a look at what they're doing and some of the opportunities that they're providing to universities and to small businesses and large businesses for that matter, to be able to pilot different types of processes within the wastewater treatment plant. It's pretty cool. So that's all I got. With that, we can adjourn.